Amy.
Oh, thank you so much, Lee. Our headline, Thorn, an incredibly weekly newsletter by NYC-DSA's Electoral Working Group, covering local politics and radical activism, thethorn.nyc. So on today's show, we will be talking with organizers from DSA's Socialist, Feminist on the very important topic of abortion access. And before we dig into the meat of the show, I just want to give a brief note. The week marks the 11th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. George Tiller, who was a provider of abortions in Kansas, and he was killed serving as an usher at his church on May 31st, 2009. So I'd like to dedicate the show to his memory and to all of those medical professionals and workers who are working to provide abortions in the United States. What is the left's approach to abortion access is the question that we're looking to examine on this edition of Revolutions Per Minute. For more on our campaign, The Mass Strike for Reproductive Freedom, and the history behind organizing for abortion access, I spoke to my comrade organizer, Jen James. So let's go ahead and roll that clip. Hi, Jen. Good evening. Thanks so much for coming back on RP.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad to be here.
So you've been on our show before discussing other organizing, but tell me about the campaign that you're representing on our show today.
Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the Mass Strike for Reproductive Freedom. It is a wide campaign. It's part of the nationwide Socialist Feminist Working Group. And we started this campaign about a year ago. Back in around the same time, actually, when there was that string of abortion bans. We were out and about it, and really, thinking about like what was the ultimate goals of these bans. It wasn't just to outlaw abortion, put a 6-week ban in Georgia. It was really to create challenges that could be brought to the Supreme Court. We also knew that the Supreme Court was heavily conservative and a very undemocratic body that is not responsive to public will, right? The Supreme Court justices serve lifetime appointments. They're not elected. They don't have a population that they're beholden to. So what is the way that we can put pressure on them? And what we decided was the only to prevent Roe versus Wade from being overturned was mass, disruptive, civil disobedience, and financial strikes that would hurt capital. Now, this was naive in several ways. As we have seen over the past year, we thought we had more time. First of all, we thought it was going to take 2 to 3 years for these challenges to work their way through the Supreme Court. That was false. We are already seeing challenges to abortion access, to birth control access, which follows the pattern of conservative legal challenges to abortion, which is, trying to chop the head off of Roe versus Wade. It's all of these insidious challenges, tweaks and trap laws to undermine abortion access. And then, of course, now under COVID, we are seeing outright abortion bans, such as the one in Texas. And so our timeline has been very mushed up, and so we're not abortion has always been under attack for decades. It will continue to be under attack. And so what we are interested in is building a nationwide infrastructure that is capable of taking assertive action to protect abortion access and to expand abortion access.
Well, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in the second half of the show today is sort of the overarching political discourse around abortion and the argument that many people on the left are now making, which is that the left has really been lacking a strong, organized, as you say, militant response to protect abortion access. So before we dig back into the mass strike and what you're working on right now, I'm curious if you can talk to me a little bit about that piece of it, the big picture, abortion access from a socialist feminist perspective. What is the framework that you're working with your organizing, and why is abortion a socialist issue?
Yeah, I mean, abortion is a socialist issue because you cannot have liberation without full bodily autonomy, point blank. And there's a whole vast, there's a lot within like what is bodily autonomy, right? That includes trans rights, that includes disability rights, a whole host of. But the framework that we are working under is the reproductive justice framework. We are not calling this a reproductive justice campaign because this is a DSA campaign. DSA is a mostly white organization. I hope, and I think I hope you all are working towards changing that, but that is just the material reality on the ground, and I don't think we help ourselves any by shying away from that fact. And since reproductive justice is a concept that has really been developed and led and fought for by Black activists, by Indigenous women and women of color, we really want to honor their work by not sort of appropriating it. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're calling this the Mass Strike for Reproductive Freedom. But what is reproductive justice? Sister Song, which is one of the organizations that was developed that came out of this movement, defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. This is really reacting to the mainstream feminist movements that define abortion through choice, through legal rights, right? And if you can have all of the laws in the book, or really ideally no laws around abortion, because that's the ultimate goal, is to not regulate abortion the way we don't regulate heart surgery, frankly. But you can, if you don't have money to pay for an abortion, you don't have that choice, right? If you can't find childcare, there are all these barriers to actually getting an abortion that are not represented under this very liberal rights framework. Not to mention the other side of the coin, which is, if you do want to have children, there's all of these ways that under our deeply racist and capitalist society, Black and brown bodies are criminalized, they are harmed, Black maternal health is facing steep disparities from white maternal health. And so reproductive justice is a framework trying to combat, and expand the fight for abortion access from simply being about abortion. So just going into the history a little bit, it was developed by a group of Black women in Chicago in June of 1994. They recognized that the women's rights movement at the time, which was led and represented by a lot of middle-class, white, wealthy women, could not defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women and trans people. And then so after this first initial gathering, one of the first things they did was put out a full-page ad in the Washington Post on August 16th, 1994. It's a beautiful letter. Google Washington Post reproductive justice, it'll come up. And I really recommend all your listeners read through the whole thing because it was a pretty revolutionary text at the time. It didn't use the term Medicare for all, but it called for universal and equal access to health services that included no copays or deductibles, which is, basically Medicare for all. It called for comprehensive coverage, which situated abortion within a larger scope of sexual health, and referenced access to STI and HIV testing, which the AIDS epidemic was still raging full time. And the other thing that I think is important is like it was 1994 during the Clintons' healthcare reform, which ultimately failed, despite being very liberal and not meeting many of the.
Despite being very liberal, interesting choice of words.
No, to bring it back to like the Obamacare days, right? It's like I think these liberals. It's that liberal strategy of like, oh, we have to preemptively compromise, but that doesn't work. It fails anyway. Conservatives, Republicans, they just don't want to give these things to people. So why are we not asking? Why are we not demanding for the things that we need in the first place instead of trying to compromise? Mm-hmm. Yada, yada, yada. I guess going back to like what all of these things mean for the mass strike for reproductive freedom is that we are situating, we are primarily fighting for abortion access, but we are trying to incorporate a whole sort of reproductive, all of reproductive labor within this campaign, which includes things like, I think mutual aid is incredibly important to reproductive justice. We don't often, DSA does a lot of like fundraising for abortions, for abortion funds, and that is mutual aid, right? Like helping people get rides to their abortion, paying for travel, paying for childcare, paying for the actual abortion, right? These are mutual aid, and I think it dovetails into other mutual aid efforts that we're really seeing at the time, right? Like grocery delivery and tenant organizing. Mm-hmm. We're also trying to incorporate workers' rights into reproductive justice. Your ability to control your reproduction really affects your work, right? How many of us, we live in a country where childcare is more expensive than college, right? And that directly impacts pregnant people's abilities and parents' abilities to participate in the labor force. Specifically right now, we are very connecting to reproductive health workers. Emily and Anne are going to get into this in the second half of the episode. The workers, abortions are still going on. They are essential health care cannot be delayed under health crisis of COVID-19, which means that we're seeing an increase of people who want abortions. We're seeing, clinics are under further shortages of PPE. There's struggles with implementing social distancing at work, right? All of the same things that we're struggling with are being compounded by the already sorry state of abortion access in America. Right. So what we're trying to do is start to organize reproductive health workers, get them talking together, get them organizing and agitating within their workplace in order to help build some of these national structures that will lead to coordinated radical action for abortion access.
Coordinated radical action for abortion access. That's the mass strike for reproductive freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jen, James, for coming to speak with me here on RPM. We're going to dig more into everything that you just spoke about in our second half of the show. So please stay tuned. And Jen, thanks again. Stay well.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. It's Amy Wilson. You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcast 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. To connect with us after the show, you can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today we're talking about abortion access. And before we get into our live interview for today, I do want to take a moment out of the show to mention that WBAI is still in our spring fundraising drive. Donations to nonprofits have dropped across the board since the COVID-19 pandemic descended for extremely understandable reasons. But if you do have any spare cash that you can give to the station, this week we want to take a moment to specifically encourage you to become a BAI buddy, which is a sustaining monthly donor. It doesn't have to be much that you give every month. Could be $5, could even be $3 a month. But that continuous source of support is really important for us to keep the station operating. One thing to know about becoming a BAI buddy is that once your annual contribution meets or exceeds $25 for the year, you also become a voting member of the station, which in my opinion is really the greatest benefit of being a BAI buddy, even though the tote bag that you get is also super cool. At Revolutions Per Minute, we're all about community control of institutions and democracy in action. We're a part of a great strip of programming every week in the 5 to 6 o'clock hour, this very important time when people are commuting from their living rooms to their dining rooms at the end of their remote work day. But we're part of this great group of programs that focuses primarily on New York City local news and politics, which is a voice that's desperately needed. But in order to be the voice of the people of New York City, we need the people of New York City to get involved and tell us what you want from the station. The producers of WBAI, like myself, give a lot of unpaid hours to the station to keep local community-based programming like ours going. So we really appreciate the support that you're showing for our efforts when you choose to become a BAI buddy, which once again is a monthly contribution. To give to the station, if you've been convinced by my pitch here to give to the station, please call 516-620-3602. Once again, that's 516-620-3602. Or you can go to wbai.org to sign up as a monthly contributor. And thank you so much. And of course, shout out always to the amazing staff of WBAI, especially our regular producer here in our time slot, Reggie. It's been amazing working together to try to move everything online and remote during this moment of clearly unprecedented situation for radio. So shout out to the staff as well. With that said, I'd love to bring my two guests for today live on the air. Emily and Anne, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm here.
Great. So welcome to Revolutions Per Minute. First, let's start off by hearing a little bit about each of you. Who are you? What is your connection to abortion access? And Anne, why don't you get us started?
Sure. My name is Anne. I'm a member of NYC DSA's Socialist Feminist Working Group, and I'm also a member of NYC for Abortion Rights, which is a group that formed about 3 years ago, focusing on direct action in support of abortion rights in New York City.
Thank you for coming on the show today, Anne. Emily, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Emily. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an abortion care worker. I do intake, financial counseling, and procedure counseling in an abortion clinic.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. I almost said thanks for having us, and then I realized I'm the one who's technically having Okay, so digging into our topic for today, abortion access and the mass strike for reproductive freedom, Jen in the show talked a little bit about how one of the initiatives of the mass strike is organizing reproductive healthcare workers themselves. As a socialist feminist and a unionist, I think is an incredibly generative idea that's fascinating as well. So my first question is to talk a little bit about the situation on the ground for workers in abortion clinics right now. What are the major workplace issues that you're in organizing reproductive healthcare workers around or on?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I think I understand the ways in which abortion, reproductive health care work is a little bit different, because we do even normally before the pandemic started, there were a number of different obstacles that we have in front of us when we're trying to work with patients and providing care. There's a lot of delayed wait period legislation, both in our state and the states surrounding us, because we do serve patients from a tri-state area, just because of those regulations and restrictions. So we are serving patients from 3 different states. So there's a lot of things to factor in there. And then also just required state counseling that needs to occur within a certain wait period before the procedure occurs. And always presenting an issue because people who have a Medicaid health insurance do not have coverage, which causes a lot of financial issues because of counseling. And then because there's people coming from 3 different states, there's also transportation issues and work issues if people can't get off work that are always an obstacle for everyone, both patients and staff who are working with those patients. So with the escalation of the global pandemic and everything that happened here in the United States, with everything being shut down and things being deemed non-essential or essential services, it really exacerbated a lot of the issues that staff and workers were already facing and patients were already facing. It became more difficult for the patients, which was already difficult for the patients to access abortion services. And then it became even more difficult for the staff to provide those services. It's interesting with the whole categorization of essential versus non-essential health services, because we saw a lot of states giving abortion providers a very hard time. Some of them ended up working out okay, like in Ohio, where abortion clinics were they were allowed to offer more services than other states, compared to Texas, where they did actually go without abortion services on and off for over a month's period of time. So some states were worse off than others. We see patients in Ohio, where I'm at. So there was a lot of mass confusion that started at the time, which both patients and workers had to work through. And we saw an increase in harassment, which affects both workers and patients with everything and the whole battle of what's essential and what's not essential. But ultimately, we were able to see that abortion care was named an essential service, and we were able to continue to operate. But it was interesting for us as the workers, because our work days, which were already really difficult, became so much more difficult so quickly. I went from working like 7-8 hour days to working like 10, 11 hour days. I went to working 6 days a week. We were just, all of the other workers and the staff were just doing everything that they could to bend over backwards to provide this really valuable care. We were being called essential workers, and we were being told that we were heroes and that we were valued. But it really highlighted the things that we'd been talking about before, where it's like, how much money are we making? What do our schedules look like? What does our transportation assistance look like? Do we have parental leave and childcare and things like that? So it was interesting to all of a sudden be in this situation where people are calling us essential workers, but we don't get treated like that, and we don't have the benefits and we don't get treated well as workers. So the only way to survive the stress of the environment, because it's already a workplace where you do often get trauma exposed, and then everything just got even more exacerbated when everybody's job and our patients' needs were so much higher than they initially already were. We really all needed to band together and support one another to even get through the challenging days. And we began to start having those conversations about, what do we want our workplace conditions to be like? What is the reality of those workplace conditions? What do we need? We began having those conversations, which was really amazing, because sometimes you do feel alienated when you're a reproductive healthcare worker, because you don't often get included in the conversations about healthcare work and organizing and unionization.
Healthcare. So speaking of healthcare on a very material and down-to-earth level, one thing that we did want to make on this show is that, we never know who might be listening when we're broadcasting on 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast. So if somebody listening right now is in the situation or knows somebody who's in the situation of needing an abortion under this pandemic, what would you recommend that they do?
I definitely really recommend first that if you know there's an abortion provider near you, you should call them. I think that a lot of people are often really nervous to reach out to the providers because they feel like there's all these steps that they have to undergo. But so you can look near an abortion fund near you. And if you're interested in learning about self-managed abortion and what those are, there's a really good website called plancpills.org, which has a report card, which is pretty amazing. All of those are really good resources, whether it's your local abortion provider or whether you're accessing a website or a fund. They're all available and great resources.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for providing us with a little bit of abortion counseling pro bono. We really appreciate that. So this is a nationwide issue, and it's a nationwide campaign, actually, the mass strike for reproductive freedom. And we have Emily, through the magic of remote broadcasting, we have Emily who is working outside of New York City. But Anne, if you wouldn't mind, tell me a little bit about what abortion access looks like here in New York. You were on Revolutions Per Minute a few months ago. For anti-abortion agitators.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to start out with bringing up New York State plays a really pivotal role in the history of legalized abortion. So New York State was one of the first states to abortion in 1973, so 3 years before Roe v. Wade was passed in the Supreme Court. And New York State also pioneered the standalone abortion clinic. So that kind of changed the whole way that abortion care was provided. In many cases, these standalone abortion clinics were set up in partnership with feminist activists and feminist organizations. And they were set up to serve as many patients as possible in welcoming environments that were more often free from the more patriarchal healthcare system. And they also made the procedure as affordable as possible. So in a lot of hospitals, abortion care was really financially not possible for many patients. And these standalone clinics that were first set up in New York made abortion affordable for many people. The other significant thing in New York happened just last year. In January 2019, the Reproductive Health Act in New York State, and that was a really big deal. It did a lot of things. It codified Roe v. Wade protections into state law. Abortion activists see New York, and especially New York City, as the abortion capital of the country. Set a target by a lot of anti-abortion organizations, especially since this Reproductive Health Act was passed. So the group that we've seen on is called Love Life, and they're a Christian anti-abortion group. They were formed in 2016 in North Carolina, and they set up a headquarters city last fall. They are a very well-funded and well-organized group. They're an affiliate of about 300 different churches nationwide. And their whole goal is to try to convince as many patients to not get abortions as possible. And they do this by hosting prayer walks outside of abortion clinics, 3 different cities in North Carolina and in New York City outside of the Planned Parenthood Street. So they have been able to mobilize hundreds of people, over 150 people every single Saturday morning. They side of the Planned Parenthood clinic. They also train sidewalk counselors who are basically trained to intercept and use information to try to convince people not to enter the clinic and not to go through with their choice to get an abortion. So they're a very powerful and scary group. I mean, I think the other thing that NYC for Abortion Rights is doing is making connections between anti-abortion protesters like this group Love Life and many others, and how they intersect with white supremacist and misogynist movements not connected to abortion thing. So we've seen a lot of violence against patient clinic workers, against abortion providers. And this violence against providers has a long history. Operation Rescue is a very good example of the violence that these anti-abortion protesters bring upon clinics and clinic workers. And we're seeing an uptick right now in aggressive anti-abortion protesters outside of clinics around the country, and threats of violence against patients and clinic workers around the country. So it's a really serious issue, and it's there's a lot of differing opinions about how to challenge these anti-abortion protesters. And we don't have to get into all of the nuances of those different positions, but I do think it's really significant for the left to mobilize effectively and to challenge these anti-abortion, whether they're outside of our clinics or they're at their churches or they're in public spaces, but just to create a movement that recognizes the danger that these ancestors pose and the connections that they have made between all of these other, right-wing violent movements.
Absolutely. And I agree that that could be a whole topic of a show in and of itself. So we'll have to have you back to discuss that. So everyone, you are listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City at 99.5 FM, streaming on your favorite podcast app. If you'd like to connect with us after the show, please email revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can look at our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or find us on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today we're talking about abortion access, and I do want to note, because of the remote broadcasting technology, unfortunately we won't be able to take listener calls for this show. It's not because I don't want to hear what you have to say about abortion, listeners. In fact, I would love to hear it, but it's just a limitation of the broadcasting service that we're using for everybody's health and safety. So we do appreciate your understanding of that. So I have Emily and Anne here with me to talk about the mass strike for reproductive freedom, which there's a lot of ways that people listening can get involved and spread the word on. Before we talk about those specific ways and the things that the mass strike is doing in terms of organizing. I'd like to hit you, Emily and Anne, with what I hope isn't a curveball question, but has something that's been on my mind today in preparing for the show, which is, why are we not using the phrase pro-choice?
many different things that work against them in this capitalist society. For example, work, not being able to take days off, not having sick days, not being able to have a stable job, have stable housing, not being able to live in a safe environment is something that comes up a lot. Not being able to be free from violence, and that includes state violence from police and prisons and incarceration. Incarceration does split up families, thing to remember, and I see that a lot at work, unfortunately. There's just so many things that rob an individual of an actual ability to like fuse and have control over their lives, that the term pro-choice is just really inadequate. And I would agree that reality does seem to support that it's just choice is a very topic.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well said. Anne, do you have anything that you'd like to add on that question?
Not much of a choice. So it just kind of divides. It divides people by their financial ability to care. And we're obviously fighting for everybody to have access to abortion. And that's why demand on the left is for
confronting a patient on the sidewalk, trying to, quote, get them to make a different choice. And I think the liberal acceptance of that framework of, it's pro-choice versus pro-life. I can't even say the words pro-life, because the ideology is so not life affirming. But I think the liberal acceptance of the framework and the dichotomy has really left very scary place that we're in right now with abortion access, where to say that we were already on the ropes in this type of organized pandemic descended and things just got heightened to an unbelievably catastrophic degree, not to editorial. But since we do have these two wonderful organizers, Emily and Anne from Mass Strike for Reproductive Freedom, New York City for Abortion Rights, Socialist Feminist Working Group, please talk to ours about how they can get involved with what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't sure if Anne wanted to go first. I can share a couple of our social media handles of different things that we're doing, different ways that you can plug in. The Instagram, if you are on Instagram, the essay Mass Strike. So yes, there are 3 S's. And on Twitter, it is, pulling that up really quick. Don't mind me. It's just mass_strike on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And do you want to talk about some of the different things that we're doing?
With the Mass Strike, yeah, there's a great reading group that's going on that's starting this Saturday. And we're reading Rosa Luxemburg's Mass Strike together. So that's going to be a reading group that's happening every other Saturday, May 30th. And at NYC for Abortion Rights, we have our next meeting on Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. And we are planning a virtual event where we're going to be talking to clinic escorts and clinic workers from different parts of the country and just hearing report backs about the anti-abortion protesting that's going on outside of their clinics, and strategizing with these clinic workers around the country about what an effective challenge can look like to these anti-abortion protesters, and how we can kind of build a movement that challenges the anti-abortion right.
Wonderful. And what about for folks who might be connected to a worker in an abortion clinic, or is there a way?
bit.ly /repro health survey. And if you are a clinic worker or know a clinic worker, please share that link with information about healthcare workers and how we can organize and support them.
Wonderful. And of course, we'll put olives on our Twitter at NYCRPM, and we'll put them in the show notes for today's episode as well, so that those who are interested in learning more and getting involved will know where to go. So as we come to the end of this week's edition per minute, focusing on abortion access for the first but not the last time here on the show, I'd like to open the floor back up to my guests, Emily and Anne. Do you have closing or
earlier, that we really can't look to politicians and NGOs to get us out of this, that we really need to connect the demands for reproductive justice to other demands, Medicare for all, affordable housing, transit justice, paid parental leave and paid sick leave. All of these demands are connected to our right to liberation and to bodily autonomy. And I think drawing those connections in reproductive rights organizing is now.
Yeah, I would also like to say on the topic of abortion access that I would really love to see socialists recognize how care work is tied to everything else. Like, abortion access is tied to everything else that we're fighting for, because it involves housing, and it involves labor, and it involves wages and money, and it involves childcare, and it involves like all of these different things, transportation and transit, that I would love to see just like the recognition. Of abortion. And it's tied to all of these different things, and the recognition of the importance of organizing care workers, not just
earlier, that we really can't look to
and with our coalition partners. Now is the time. We need everybody. Grab a neighbor from 6 feet away and do what you can to please help us build the better world. So thank you so much again, Emily, today.